In this series, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of application architecture. This is a large and multifaceted topic. I'm not sure that there's ever been a single book or resource that's come available that's adequately discussed all of the topic matter under this large umbrella. And so I'm not going to kid myself and assume that I can accomplish that. In fact, I know that I can't. I've already tried to start this series 5 times prior to this recording, and I've recorded 3 or 4 hours, and then I'll become completely disgusted with what I've come up with and throw it all away because I have either missed something important, I've not adequately described something, I've been too theoretical in the past, and so on. And so I want to try to take a different tact. I hope that you like what I came up with. It is a difficult topic to talk about, and I'm just going to have to do my best and hope that it helps in some small way. All right, so I'm going to assume that you came to this series after finishing learning how to write C# code in console window applications. You've probably learned something about the .NET framework. You've learned how to use Visual Studio to some degree. You've been learning about object-oriented programming. You may have a few other things like working with the Entity Framework, how to access data and display it in a console window, and so on. And you're ready to move on and build real applications, web-based applications, desktop applications. And so you might be asking me to just show you the tactics of building these styles of application, how to create file new project, WPF, or ASP.NET application, one of the templates, and then start dragging and dropping, writing code, and so on. However, I think that might be the wrong place to start. You'll see that many demonstrations from Microsoft and from authors and other screencasters will take this approach. It's easy to do. You'll find that oftentimes Microsoft wants to demonstrate how easy it is to use their tools to build an application within an hour, or they want to show you how to build a application that's small in scope that demonstrates a single feature. And so you get into this practice of seeing how to build everything from the user interface down to the database, all inside of just a short period of time, and steps are not taken to discuss what you would do on a larger scale application. So there's this book that I think is pertinent here, and I'm going to introduce it now. It actually has nothing to do with software development. It's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And this book talks about your professional career as you move up the ranks from, in our case, a software developer into middle management, and then what happens when you need to move on to an executive level. Well, the skills that get you from one point A to point B won't necessarily get you also to point C. That's the purpose of this book, and I think it's pertinent here. What got you to the point where you're able to build these simple applications by dragging and dropping and by writing lots of code behind a button one-click event in order to wire up the database, maybe perform some small actions on it and display to the user. That style or tools-driven approach to building applications doesn't cut it when you have to build an enterprise-scale application where there are many different stakeholders, when there are many business rules, or you need to automate workflows. You have to pass data through different network scopes. You expect many changes throughout the development process, and the business expects to use this application for years and years to come. You might need a better strategy than just slapping together an application as quickly as possible. So in all things, you'll want to pick the right tool for the job. And while I suspect that you're not going to be put into the position of architecting an enterprise scale application on day one, you can begin to think about these in these terms. Frankly, it's not just one or the other, that there's many gradations to this scale. Between the ultimate tools-driven approach where you're dragging and dropping and setting properties and slinging code just anywhere you please, and the ultimate enterprise approach where everything is layered and it's decoupled from one another and so on. So throughout the series, I'm going to talk about the biggest challenge that software developers face and organizations face, and that is the problem of change. Change is particularly brutal on the software development process because when you make changes to things, you can inadvertently introduce defects into your software. So in some ways, talking about architecture means that you're finding ways to mitigate the effects of change inside of the application that you're building. Managing and adapting to change is a huge motivation behind most of the things that we're going to talk about in this series. So what I want to do is I want to cover the fundamentals of architecture as fast as possible. So that'll mean that we're going to talk about, first of all, high-level principles that influence your architectural choices. We'll talk about things like these principles like separation of concerns. What is a concern and why do you need to separate them? And we'll talk about high-level patterns, which are patterns are just simply common solutions to problems. And so we're going to talk about layered architecture as a common solution to enterprise scale application development, but it can also be applied on smaller scales as well. Then we're going to talk about some lower level principles and patterns. A lower level principle might be like you ain't going to need it, YAGNI, I guess you would say, or the DRIVE principle, don't repeat yourself. So these are lower level principles that influence how you compose lines of code or modules, classes, methods, and things of that nature. And we'll also talk about lower level patterns, like what is a factory, what is a data transfer object, and so on. We're going to talk about which .NET technologies map to the given layers of a layered architecture and what patterns are enabled by given technologies. We're going to talk about some practices that will lead you to better design, things like test-driven design and domain-driven design. Where do these fit in? What purpose do they serve in an application architecture as you're building an application as well? So principles and patterns and practices, there's literally no end to these things. So I'm only going to be covering the most popular ones here that you're likely to find when you go get your first or second .NET development job. We're also going to talk about cross-cutting concerns. These are things that are crucial to the success of your application, but are non-functional in nature, meaning that users may not think about these things. They may have not even requested these sorts of things, but these are the sorts of things that support the ongoing success and the function of the system. So things like exception handling and logging, monitoring, and even gathering telemetry statistics about usage, caching data, securing the software, and so on. And then I'm also going to try and speak in the most practical and pragmatic terms possible. In addition to this lecture style, which will predominate the beginning of this series, I also have an example architecture that I'm going to demonstrate creating from beginning to end. But it's really only that, just an example architecture. I invented a problem and architected, designed, and built a solution to fix that problem. And frankly, it was overkill because I wanted to keep it small enough so that I could do it in a few hours, but could demonstrate bigger ideas. So we'll apply some of the theory that we'll talk about in the first part of this series with finally some hands-on coding that applies these ideas, even if it's not an ideal fit for what I'm doing. I mean, I'm going to be approaching a tiny nail to hold up a picture on a wall with a jackhammer. But I'm doing it so that you can kind of see the thought process and how I'm applying these ideas in a short frame of time to a problem. All right, in this case, it'll just be something simple like customer orders, order items, products, that ordering process. All right, so starting in the next lesson, we're going to define what architecture is and just keep moving on from there. So we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.